see me having to crawl up this staircase to get up to the corridor walkway, because when the Environment Agency did these new revetment work with the contractor Balfour Beatty, they refused to put back our handrails, which were down the steps here, the old steps. Which took a 5 years campaign with the authorities, and eventually the Port of London Authority kindly paid for them. So this video, my cameraman will be sitting on the ledge, and this is how I normally have to go back up, and then I'll show you me coming back down, because I have nothing to hold on to, as I have a spinal compression injury from falling in a supermarket. I'm 84 years old, and no disabled person who comes up to a specially designed stroke and car park here can actually get down to even put their 4 feet in the water. The same is round the corner, and I'll show you that video later, where you have a lower ramp on the beach for the disabled, all marked out, but there's new steps right next to it. Here again, no handrails, because the Environment Agency and the other authorities locally say they're dangerous and there's no need for them, but it's not up to them. We, the people, especially more disabled than myself, want access to the sea, and it's pure discrimination against the disabled that they're not putting them back. Pure ignorance on the part of the so-called authorities who feel they rule. Thank you for watching. As you'll see now, myself, who has a compressed spine and has nothing to hold you, the way I have to go up the stairs, and then you'll see me having to come back down to reach the water. Thank you. Just an example of what I have to go through every time I want to come on paddle or swim, just with my arms because I can't use my legs, and high tide. And anybody else in a far worse disability situation than myself cannot walk down these steps because there's no handrails. Same at Thorny Bay. And these moronic idiots who decided, understand, in a committee that they wanted to keep the seafront revetment uniform without any regard at all for disability rights, should be, in my view, prosecuted and changed. That's why these series of films and videos are being made to put on YouTube to to try hopefully to get somebody in authority who cares about other people's rights to actually resolve it for the disabled. And also later on in this video I'll be covering lots of health and safety issues which nobody seems to have any interest in resolving. Thanks for watching. My name is Clarence Hobbs. I'm an 84-year-old veteran Royal Air Force serviceman. And my family have lived on Canvey Island since 1955, and after military service and marriage I moved back onto the island in 1978. We locals know the conditions, not people who come from off the island, architects or whatever they claim to be, or civil engineers. And this revetment work, right along the 1¾ miles length of the seafront, straightest seafront of Canvey Island, was not designed as Belfort claimed by Dutch sea defence engineers. No Dutch sea defence engineers will build a roadway, which this is, from the foreshore walkway to the beach and mudflats without what are known as shark speed to break the power of the huge container ships that pass the island from here right up to London Gateway and then come back out to the North Sea. Sharks being 400 metres long, contain 20,000 containers at a 52-foot draft, and the channel outside here in the Thames estuary between Essex and Kent is only some 80 feet deep, regularly dredged. And one can, well, you can't imagine, but one can conceive the actual power, the tonnage of that water racing from quite a short distance away, normally 15 minutes after the big container ships were passed, and then the stern wash 10 minutes later. And that's why we have all sand, stand up, we have all sand coming right up on top of the walkway, which we've never ever had, because there's nothing to stop the pressure waves of the wash from the container ships, plus the wind and heavy seas, reaching down to the mudflats and the beach and throwing all the sand up onto the footpath. As I said, we've never had that, and it's just an example of the poor design and the stupidity of whoever planned this whole project, £75 million project. The Kentish dragstones we had here before, similar in colour to the steps, were rough, and they were the revetment on a very poor basis, and they were leaching sea and rainwater, and the clay, the basic clay underneath, before the 25 feet piling seawall, which was done in the late 1970s, I believe. They should have lifted the Kentish dragstone, put this roadway, basically macadam aggregate down, and put the Kentish dragstones back on top. For appearance, as well as it would have been a natural way of breaking the wash and any heavy seas and reaching the pathway. It is claimed in their documentation that this should serve the island to the 2070s. But at the rate of global warming, increase in sea and increase in water levels, it is doubtful whether the foreshore walkway will be able to be used at high tide by 2070. We just have to talk this through. And before all this was planned and designed, no consultation with the island population. Many having been born on the island, there was no pre-consultation. There was no information put in letterboxes about what they planned, so we had a means of making observations to them. That's to the contractor plus the environment agents or whoever else decided to get involved in this appalling so-called revetment to protect Canvey Island from the sea. No way from the beach, the mudflats, until the level land below sea level on the other side of the land side of the revetment. The sea could never have broken through that something like 60 yards of clay and the pilings on the seawall and some rocks. The reason we had to collapse further down the coast by the Chapman Sands former site of the jetty was because they found just after the 6-inch concrete foreshore walkway, it was just clay. There was no rock, no aggregate. So of course with rainwater leaching by the seawall and on the separation between the concrete blocks, 12-foot blocks of the actual walkway, that seepage the last 50 years had desiccated all the clay into powder form, and that's why a 12-foot section collapsed. Not 8 metres as the original documentation published online from the Environment Agency claimed. There was no 8-metre long section that collapsed, just a 12-foot section near the groin east of where the Chapman Sands jetty used to be, which here again the local authorities, Castle Point Borough Council, destroyed without any conception of its public value to the islanders, children learning to swim, etc., just because the yacht club had they put the lease rent up so much they couldn't afford it because the council wanted the land to build houses, and they got nearly £900,000 for the land, but there was no reason to take the jetty down. It took 4 to 6 Balfour Beatty workmen between tides to dismantle the jetty. It took them a month. So sturdy was it. It was only the last 4 metres that had gone rotten because the yacht club had not spent the money properly, the £11,000 lottery grant they got to rebuild the planking. The 4 metres down the end, or 4 yards, they didn't do. And the council claimed that the jetty was rotten just because those 4 metres of something like a 150 metre long jetty. There are millions of tonnes of timber that was dismantled, with Balfour Beatty staff very carefully taken out any metal screws or fragments still left in it. The timbers, several large lorry loads, were gradually taken away, they claimed, to a timber yard to identify the wood, and then those timbers were distributed apparently to Concord Beach, which is fine because that's a public volunteer group looking after it. But I also heard, which is denied by Balfour Beatty, that the Island Yacht Club, the point on the island, also received timbers. A private yacht club receiving public timbers, which they never paid for, public assets. And I really want the government at some source to hold a cheap, simple, straightforward inquiry without taking years of why the councils thought they had the power to literally destroy public assets without any regard to the legitimacy of it. I think they overstretched their powers of authority because they ignored my request and many others to take the jetty over and turn it into a charitable trust with properly managed people watching it for the youngsters and adults to continue using the jetty to swim. With the gates locked so no young children could ever be drowned or get hurt. But all the 15 years I've been involved with feeding sea life from the jetty, talking about sanderlings and turnstones, a 500 strong flock, which I took over from an elderly lady with a dog, and she asked me when she became ill to carry on with it, which I did. And lots of other creatures, seals, cormorants, visiting geese, ducks, whatever you name, and even seals were nesting on the end, having a break, and all that was just destroyed willy-nilly without any regard for our pleas. I personally tried to save the jetty from being destroyed, but I was stonewalled all the way along and didn't even have response from my own local MP or others in the government to put a stop to this I say appalling destruction of a public asset which was no danger to anybody. Children had to climb over the metal gate there. no child in my 15 years knowledge of actually being by the jetty in most high tides and watching them and enjoying their swimming and fun. Nobody hurt each other, they didn't jump on each other. Even youngsters saw the older youngsters not misbehaving, doing anything dangerous. They all swam on the west side of the jetty where we kept the beach clean from rocks. Nobody swam or jumped in on the eastern side of the jetty because they were all rocks and bits of metal sticking out and everything else. Never was an accident as far as I know. And I did contact the police quite some time ago when I started this campaign to try and save the jetty, and there was no record of any injuries there or rowdy behaviour. There was some fake, I believe, fake news where they said there was stone bombing. Somebody claimed that the youngsters were jumping in where the rocks were to see if they could hit the rocks, cut their feet on the limpets and barnacles on them, and come back up showing their wounds. That was complete fake news. No youngsters locally would ever do that because they all know how sharp and dangerous rocks can be. And none of them would jump in deliberately on the eastern side of the jetty to injure themselves. That was a complete fake news. But here again, it was all poo-pooed, nobody believed it, and they just ignored all the advice. I really want an inquiry to get our jetty rebuilt. And if the council, people responsible for that decision, have to go to their reserves, or even personally, I would pursue that. And in relation to discrimination against the disabled, although we're out of Brexit now, we're out of the European Union after Brexit, we still have an appalling link with the ECHR. And I will personally go to Brussels and take whoever is responsible for not putting the handrails back in here and not providing handrails by the new steps by a disabled area in Thorney Bay. I'll take them to the ECHR, I'll take them to court, because it's disgusting and moronic, their whole attitude to this. And it's not dangerous because when the Port of London Authority kindly put in the yellow pole to show there was obstruction below the waves, nobody hurt themselves. There's a groin just here, which every local person can't see it at the moment because it's high tide. There's a groin there. And when they started to take this apart before doing it, from the next gate further along, you could see what they were doing. They took down the yellow pole, and I asked them, can I please have the yellow pole so we can reinstate it? They refused Balfour Beatty. And then I heard they put it in a skip for scrap metal recycling. A deliberate, disgusting behaviour. So they can almost claim there was nothing here before. They won't put anything back because people get hurt. If you have proper notice boards, which I've asked Maritime and Coast Guard to consider, at every gate entrance, about 20 of them on the seawall here, of all the do's and don'ts, and I've already done an email to a whole pile of departments in government and locally about what those notice boards should contain. Abroad everywhere, even in cartoon form so children can see it, little drawings, you put a whole list of do's and don'ts, explain to people about safety on the seafront. And when local people are not around, visitors have no knowledge about waves coming up, about the watch of ships, about Pacific oyster shells, which we now have, which were introduced by the British fishing industry in the 1960s to replenish our failing native oysters. But these Pacific oyster shells, you can recognise them. It's an oyster shell floating up on the beach or up on the seawall with this sand which is thrown up by the sea because of the negative wave breaking of the new revetment works. They're armoured, very sharp corners, and the reason they're armoured so heavily from the Pacific is because you have sea creatures there that want to eat them, not so much here in the Thames Estuary and elsewhere around British waters, and they're armoured and extremely sharp to stop other sea life devouring them. And there's no notices here again, which those notices on each gate, outside and inside, to advise them. The standard notice on either metal or heavy perspex so it can't be vandalised, bolted properly to the seawall so it can't be ripped off or chiseled away. So everybody who comes to the seafront are happy and safe and there's no accidents. Or are they going to wait for the disabled and with those lack of notices until some child gets washed off of the foreshore walkway by the wash, which you sometimes get for no reason, like you're just seeing now. And this is without shipping coming in. This is just the tide going out, mixing with the seawater and the fresh water, and you suddenly get that happening. And there's no advice up here warning people of what the sea can do, and you have to be aware. There's no advice whatsoever. And here again, I don't suppose the Book London Authority or Maritime and Coast Guards were even consulted on their support for this whole project. You can now see the groin. There are a series of these along the seafront. There is no little notice board on the top of the foreshore footpath to warn people there's an obstruction, there's a groin going across. Between this groin and down here, the next groin, there was another groin opposite the Little Huts Cafe, where the next steps from the new car park come up. That was the collapsed groin. The Balfour BT removed the rocks from the groin, completely removed it instead of rebuilding it. And I heard that they buried a lot of the rocks underneath this 1 metre thick revetment material to save money on that material, so their profits from the end of the whole project were greater for the company. They would deny it, but I suspect if you were to excavate certain parts of this, you'll find all sorts of rocks and other debris from the seafront embedded in this to save material usage, agricultural usage. By Thorney Bay, which I might discuss later in another clip, by Thorney Bay round the corner. The first steps, which you'll see later without a handrail for the disabled as well, there was a huge pit there below those steps. And I heard from many people that they saw Balfour Beatty, lots of concrete and other debris which they dug out from going deeper than the existing revetment to make it further down, which is fine. But instead of all that debris being taken away off site, it was buried. It was actually buried under the steps in a huge pit. As I mentioned earlier, around the front of Thorney Bay, we also have a disabled area here with benches for disabled. And here again, the new steps behind me, they're refusing to put handrails. So the disabled people, far more than me, cannot even get down to the seawater to feel it with their fingers or paddle. Here again, another disgusting discrimination against the disabled. I'll mention something else now which is not to do with health and safety. When the tide's out, that part of Thorney Bay, you can see it's all just mud flats when the tide's out below the revetment. It was the same around here, apart from a few stones, but all this debris here has been created since the 3rd of January 2023 by Balfour Beatty experimenting on the east side of Thorney Bay wall when they were first doing the revetment works. To my face, when I complained to the chief engineer or the one in charge down in the main depot office by Seaview Road, right down the east end of the island, to my face he lied. They have photographs showing that all those rocks and debris was there before. It wasn't. We have photographs from 2020, before they started this revetment work, of hardly anything down this side. And they point blank refused to remove all this debris and rock in a very arrogant, selfish way beyond belief for public works paid for through our taxation, through national government, with the Environment Agency not monitoring what their contractor was actually doing. And it's appalling that they can get away with it, but they have, because they've now left. This is the 31st of July 2025. All management have left the main depot. It's being taken apart. All the roadway and flooring, all the roadway and works area, which was properly built like a road, they've removed it all, despite that I, several weeks ago, wrote to the council saying retain it by the land side, revetment work on the clay, the clay slopes, so that Eastern Esplanade roadway could carry on almost to the swings beyond, and the rest of the field is returned to turf, which is fair enough. And there's more parking, and they could have put parking meter machines there and earned money, but they've allowed, or been instructed by the Environment Agency and the council, to remove the whole of their work site, which was built like a permanent covering. And there's no point to remove it just by the sea wall side, because the roadway could have extended the Eastern Esplanade just before the children amusement place, a little mini roundabout there, block it off so they can't drive further. And there could have been all more parking along the seawall there, near to the existing old car park, which was by the steps, next to the steps for the Chapman Sands jetty, which the council, as I mentioned before, to my mind, have illegally just destroyed. Nothing at all wrong with it, at least 50 years more life in it, made of white Russian oak and other hard timbers, and it's just gone because they refuse to allow the purchase or lease without any funds being paid to the council, so that we could have created a charitable trust, had proper people monitoring. So their claim that it was dangerous for children to swim off the jetty is rebuked, because in 1955 I learned to swim in the sea on that jetty, as well as many thousands of islanders, and many hundreds of young people, quite young, were swimming, having to climb over the yacht club's metal gate, continually swimming there at high tides without any accidents ever happening, knowing which side, it was normally the west side of the jetty to swim, like the east side was all rocks, and they knew they didn't jump off that side because they get bad injuries from the limpets of barnacles on the rocks. And the western side of the jetty was kept clear by myself, other adults, plus the youngsters, of any rocks which the sea happened to move across there, and they knew they could jump off there any stage of the high tide without getting any injuries. And all the council would say, it's dangerous, you know, we're not allowing it, we're not allowing you to take it over, charitable trust. And that was public asset, an important public asset for the island, to teach local children to swim, or have a free ability than to swim. And as far as I'm aware, there's never been any accident of any serious nature through rowdiness or other misbehaviour of those children of the island. And they all try to support me in their own ways, even school teachers, not proactively. I was the one trying to get the jetty saved, but they all liked the leaflets, which were ignored even by a local MP and the council and everybody else, all just ignored. And even I will produce a list attached to this, and you can see how many emails were sent out to various government departments and ministers, and you'll see how many responded, most of which didn't even have the common courtesy to acknowledge my email. Such is the arrogance of officialdom to the local population. As I said before, Parliament and everything to do with agencies and councils and everything, they work for us. They're public civil servants. We pay their salaries. But the whole attitude is that we're in charge now, you have to do what we say. No. We pay for your services and salaries. We are the ones who determine what should happen. We should at least be consulted. there should be proper democracy here, not democracy in their terms, which is not democracy at all. So thank you for watching this video. I hope somebody will take some notice, but if no notice is taken, I will take this personally to the ECHR as abuse for disabled people, and also health and safety aspects, which will be another segment of this series of videos, which will be put on there. And if the officialdom does not take any notice, it will go on YouTube, TikTok and everything else to embarrass you idiot people that think you're in charge of this country, to embarrass you to do the right thing. These disability benches, especially provided by the deck here, the concrete deck for the disabled, these, I only realised recently, these were donated remembering people who were disabled who loved Canvey beaches. So each of these along here has got dedications on them. And it's even more reason why the so-called authorities that know best have not put handrails on the new steps so that they can walk from here in wheelchairs or whatever, hold the handrails and walk down the steps and touch with their hands or put their feet in the seawater. Now it's impossible. They can't walk across this beach with the walking stick. Prams can't be pushed here to get them to the water's edge because it will sink in. And it beggars belief that they would say they're not going to put handrails for the disabled on the nearest steps to the sea. So this will be new handrails. Fisherman's Point round the corner where I started this video is where they were. There were handrails, only one side unfortunately, but at least the Port of London Authority paid for it. And I have approached the Port of London Authority with these comments. They haven't come back to me yet, but I'm sure they will be just as appalled as anybody else that the powers that be locally and the Environment Agency and the contractor Balfour Beatty are refusing to reinstate the handrails for the disabled people. As I've said before, far worse than me. Their inaction doesn't stop me paddling or swimming just with my arms, because I can't rely upon my leg, because I had that serious fall 12 years ago in the supermarket on liquid and compressed my spine, L2 to L5. So the only way I can get down to the sea, either to paddle or swim, is to go down backwards. And you have an example of this, not acted out, but genuinely, how I have to reach the sea and come back up. And you'll notice at the top I have to pause for a few moments because there's nothing to hold on to, which my brain telling me from the accident I need, otherwise I'll fall. And I have to gradually control my stance, etc., to stand straight and then straight walk forward so I don't fall over, which my brain's telling me I might fall over, but it's just a reflection of the brain's memory of the catastrophic fall I had in Tesco supermarket at Cheston in Hertfordshire. Thank you. The start of this video is talking about the groins in Thorney Bay, and also the debris, the rock and other debris left by the contractors on the east side of Thorney Bay where they did their experimental work. And they claim point blankly, to your face, lie, that it was there before. We have photographs proving it wasn't. This is a typical ginormous container ship coming up, entering the Thames estuary to dock and disload cargo at London Gateway, part of Abu Dhabi port complex. And this ship is clearly just doing the 8 knots, but quite often they go faster than this, and now it's sort of half the tide's going out. It will still displace the wash, and you will see it in Thorney Bay here about 20 minutes after that container ship passes Thorney Bay entranceway. And you can imagine when there's half or full tide, the amount of tonnage pressure on the seawater and that's why we got sand and shells along the seafront at Fisherman's Point, right up on the foreshore walkway, something we've never had when the Kentish dragstones were there. Prior to January 2023, when the revetment project was commenced by the Environment Agency on Canvey Island. All the time they negate everything we say, and we islanders know the state of the sea and what it can do, and these are all strangers that don't seem to have any knowledge or interest in listening to what the locals have got to tell them. The only example they give is around another area further up the east coast, not too far away I understand, called Sandy something, where they did this similar revetment roadway from the seawall side or the walkways down to the beach, and they're actually saying that that experience qualifies them to do this revetment work, where Canvey Island sticks out into the estuary and is not too far from the sea shipping lanes. And as I say, 15 minutes after the ships have passed, we then get the bow wave wash. Another 10 minutes after, these times can vary of course depending on the wind, the state of the tide and speed of the container ships. The stern wash will then come off 10 minutes, come to the beach 10 minutes after the ship, after the bow wash has struck the beach. And you can see a tug at the end of the container ship. It's keeping pace with it, because nearer the docks, sometimes for the bigger ships, and this is not one of the bigger container ships, some of the largest container ships, two tugs at the front and one at the back, and they have to help slow the ship down from the forward momentum, because even when they cut the engines, several miles can be covered by the ship without the engine operating. Such is the power of the weight of gravity on the movement forward of the ship. And quite often when we can see from the shore without cameras or speed indicators, we can see that many of these ships entering London Gateway and Tilbury docks are exceeding the 8 knots maritime map limit to the speeds. And with these giant container ships, exceeding the speeds only damages the seabed more, the mud flaps leading up to the beach more, and the beach itself being thrown up with the power of the wave tonnage hitting the sea, the actual power of the seawater striking the beach. Earlier today I mentioned about the groin being removed, the collapsed groin being removed from Fisherman's Point to the next groin you now saw on the video. Completely removed it, thereby destabilizing the flow of the sand. With the groin in place, the sand was retained between each groin, but now because they removed it completely and it was only collapsed, and they removed it in such a way to show no trace that there was a groin there. Heaven knows why they bothered to do that, but they've done it. And a lot of that groin rock, which was sunken on the beach, which they had to dig down to do the deeper revetment, I understand from other islanders that it's been placed under the revetment roadway, primarily to lower the amount of materials they need to do the current revetment. In other words, hidden, but not so much of it, because they've used the sunken groin material in the sea wall. There's no way of proving this, of course, unless it's re-excavated and they can see it. Just like down here, the bottom of those new steps by the disabled area at Thorney Bay, there was a huge pit there, and I will include photographs of that later on. There was a few, I've got photographs showing how deep it was and how much waste was here. All of that, spent concrete waste and everything, should have been taken away by the crane and the ballast lorries which were available at the time, but I understand they buried it under the mudflats and below the new stairs, and then covered it up. Here again, something you're not supposed to do is bury waste, especially concrete with sharp bits of metal, etc., and bury it under the mudflats. You're not supposed to do that. Any good civil engineering firm knows that. And originally, when they put, and you'll see examples of this fencing, when they put this fencing around to stop the public perhaps getting hurt by going into the works, they put hessian. They put hessian there so we couldn't see what they were doing, would you believe it? But what they didn't realise is that up here, at the top of the entranceway, the gateway here at Thorney Bay, you could see over the fencing. You could see over the coverage. And then eventually they realised they couldn't stop us watching what they were doing, and they took it down. Such is their moronic thinking patterns. Anyway, at the end of the... And if you look now towards, you can see the sort of... That's a brand new car ferry going across to Holland. And quite often you have 2 or 3 ships that size passing each other, churning up the shipping excavated shipping lanes across the mudflats onto the sand. You can imagine the churning of the water, the force of it is throwing everything up. And I repeat again, we've never on the seafront, my fisherman's point, had sand all the way along beyond the groin, which they've removed completely, the collapsed groin, to the next one. So it's just on this corner you have extreme pressures on the seawater from when the Thames comes down to meet the North Sea, about just off Canvey here, and that water, which is fresh water, it's a seawater. Seawater saltiness can't go into the fresh water, and it's extremely salty and buoyant just out here. But you can imagine the physical force when the tide turns. It comes round into the bay, goes round this corner, around the front, and around here. This is not the groin by Fisherman's Point, but further along, beyond the rooftops of those houses, is another turning, which it becomes mainly straight for 1 3/4 miles along the seafront. On that corner, there's no notice warning people at turn of the tide, beware the current underneath, which appears every tide when the tide turns, and obviously when the sea's right out, it's not there, so it's invisible. And that's one of the things that I've included that should be mentioned, or sorry, I've got to add it to a list I've sent to Maritime and Coast Guards and other agencies, about proper notices being at each gateway all along the seafront, 20 of them. And there should be proper notices, warnings about the do's and don'ts, safety and things to look out for, like the Pacific oyster shells, now prevalent along the seafront here, which have extremely sharp edges to them, armoured, so you can't break them easily even with your hands. And there's no information of people to beware of those when they're walking barefooted, even down to the beach or down the steps, certainly not down the revetments. They shouldn't walk down the revetments, because you see the one in Thorney Bay, algae and seaweed is now growing quite happily on the lower parts. And if you walk down there, you will just slip and injure yourself very badly. But there's no notices warning people, especially visitors to the island, not to do it. It looks attractive. It's walkable, it's not that steep, but it's just like a road. It's not a sea defence revetment in a narrow part of the Thames estuary, as Canvey sticks out into the estuary and is not far from the shipping lanes. Here again, totally ignored by the so-called experts and agencies involved. They all want a good shaking and putting people that have knowledge of the sea in their place, and hopefully in the future they won't make such catastrophic design errors as they've made on this revetment work on Canvey Front seawall, which, as I said elsewhere, I do not believe was necessary in the first place. When they did the pilings in the 1970s, the new sea wall as it is now, the pilings were 25 feet deep. For them to claim that from the mudflats, under the revetment, under the sea wall, under the land revetment of clay, the sea could get through all that mass of mixture of steel, clay, rocks and other soils and clays, that the sea could creep underneath is a fallacy. And that what was put forward to claim it was necessary to do this revetment work. I don't believe it was necessary at all, and one day I hope there's a full inquiry that will prove this point, that it was a total waste of money. That £75 million could have rebuilt the high street on Canvey, could have rebuilt all sorts of things on the island which is greatly in need, or that money could have been spent elsewhere for more important things like potholes in the county of Essex, which they claim they don't have enough money to actually repair them all. And that 75 million would have enabled our roads, certainly in Essex, to be fully restored and no accidents and no damage to vehicles, tyres, etc. Now is a good clear view of the east side of Thorney Bay, showing the debris field right by the sand up to the revetment. And if you look along towards the Kent coast in the distance, you'll see the groin right at the end, dark colour. Then you see a lighter patch raised beyond the mudflats and the rocks, and you see the rest of the debris field back here again. None of that was there before they started the revetment works in January 2023, experimental work, when they first came, rather June of that year, when they first started actually to do the work, after spending 6 months repairing the land side of the walkway and the revetment to make it a proper trackway for cranes and other heavy ballast lorries, etc. The grey area just in front, the extremely raised, probably 6 feet from the mudflats, maybe a bit less than that, but that grey, very long strip in front of the groin sticking out, the seaweed covered groin, that's all clay which they dumped there, and then blindly to your face arrogantly said we didn't put any clay there. We saw them do it, and it's still evident today because the sea hasn't washed away coming back towards the beach, hasn't washed away the remaining clay, which it gradually will do in time. So all the mud flats here and all that clay was from where they dug down below the original revetment to go deeper, another metre or so deeper, claiming that the water's going under the seawall, but it won't, onto the land, onto Canvey itself, and bringing up all the debris, because in the old days islanders threw all their household waste and other rubbish over the seawall into the sea, would you believe it? That's what they did in the 50s. So all that clay and lots of debris in here are broken glass from bottles, bits of twisted metal, bits of concrete with metal sticking out, everything which today we regard as a danger to walk on, or to when you're playing in the sand, or even just looking for crabbing, you would turn over old debris, including cans, rusty candies sticking up, etc. All things that give you blood poisoning. That's all within here, especially at the end where you can see the raised clay, and amongst all this rocks and everything. Some of it was there, but it wasn't this extent, and we saw them do it, and they just got away with it by being arrogant and saying we've got films to prove it was there before. If now we go across to the west side of Thorney Bay, right up, you will see right by the groins and the seaweed, you can see the mud flats there are flat, nothing there. That's how this side was primarily before this Environment Agency sponsored revetment work was carried out. So all those rocks you can see in front here, in the middle of the beach, all the way around there to the groin out there, need to be now hand removed and somehow with gravity, a conveyor belt or something, put up here Windsor Gateway onto small little mini ballast trucks and taken away from the site. That should not be there. All this debris, all these rocks should not be there. It should be a flat mud flat, as it is over the west side of Thorney Bay. And there's a few rocks here in front of the first groin, which, would you believe, it's got a ginormous hole, which you will see photographs or a video before included in this clip. And the one beyond has some holes in it, but it's below the sand line. Now the sand was deeper there, but when they started doing the experimental work here, they grubbed a lot of this sand to put in amongst the Kentish dragstone to level it before they put this new roadway material down the new revetment. Maritime law around Britain says you must not disturb sand, and a lot of the original sand here was cockle shell ground sand, and over the years they have put sharp and other sands here to make it a nice beach. But they had to come here with tons and tons and tons of new sand to fill in where they grubbed out the sand to put in the experimental eastern side of Thorney Bay on top of the Kentish dragstone before they put this on top. And they would deny they've done that, but they did. So they've actually gone against legislation that say you must preserve or conserve sand on beaches, especially around Canvey, where due to the tides and certainly now the power of the container ships with the wash is in danger of being swept away. And certainly around the front, in front of the new car park and the Little Huts Cafe, the first flight of steps going down to the beach in by the new car park, all along there, the groin they grubbed out, the collapsed groin they grubbed out, took away completely, would have stopped sand moving from there to Fisherman's Point to keep us a nice broad beach. I will include photographs in here showing how the beach was, how wide the beach was there before this £75 million revetment work was carried out. And many will try and say poo-poo it and it's all nonsense and everything else, but we and many hundreds of other islanders have got photographs of the work they did, how poor it was in some instances, and we have retired civil engineers on the island. None of them spoke favourably of Balfour Beatty or the Environment Agency, and certainly not about Jacobs, which was the public relations front to the whole project for the Environment Agency and Balfour Beatty. None of them had a good word to say about those concerns. And when you speak to a lot of council workmen, Pinnacles and others, who beautifully keep our seafront clear from litter every day and make it look as nice as possible, none of them had a favourable word to say about the Environment Agency. But the local one we have in this part of East Anglia are quite useless. Anyway, I'm just telling you what the general view is. And we on the island are a little bit sick of people coming from outside thinking they know everything and we know nothing. And that has got to stop. Let's have democracy. Let the people have their say before things happen, so the input's there and then everybody has a better result and nobody can claim that things were not democratic and they weren't done properly. We're now on the new foreshore walkway on the sea wall frontage at Canvey Island, and you can see a gate to your left which leads down to the beach, and there's the Thames estuary across to Kent. Now as you come along this lovely new walkway, you will see that there's an entranceway to the staircase down to the new car park. New car park. And if you notice, even at this, from this down to the steps, there's a slight slope. And although there are anti-trip or anti-slide on the first two landings down the stairs, there's nothing for small children with scooters or bicycles just ahead of the parents saying, oh, that looks interesting, it's a bit of a slope. And there's nothing to prevent them or make them think that it's dangerous to go down the stairs, because there's no little central curved barrier in the middle of the staircase as a precaution with a couple of bars across it to stop small children hurtling down and being killed down the stairs. Now, most seaside places, certainly on the continent and some places in this country, there is a little central safety bar, not as high as these handrails down the side, and curved in such a way that it makes them think, and that could even be yellow, day glowed, to make them think it's dangerous to go down the steps. I've mentioned this to the council before, even when they were doing it. And originally, would you believe it, the first two steps down were not there. And the slope was severe down to the second landing, you can see. And I virtually said to them, unless you put more steps in there so the actual slope is not so inviting for small children, and even for people who are slightly disabled or can't walk properly, getting to the handrails, there's going to be a terrible accident here. And I bullied them with threatening them to report them to the health and safety, and they reluctantly put two new steps in. And as we go down, the film will, the camera will be turned round, and you can see the different colour of the top two steps. That's purely because I, as an islander, or even as a human being with some reasoning powers, could see the potential accident. But these contractors just couldn't see that what they'd built was dangerous. So it beggars belief that they were allowed to do lots of things, and there'd be more in later videos, that were potentially dangerous, but they just didn't care. Now we're just walking down those particular steps. Further on from what I regard as unsafe, no central barrier, preventing accidents, small children, cyclists or even elderly people. If you now look towards the top part, these three steps you see are new compared with the bottom ones which you filmed earlier. And I've actually had to force them through the threat of health and safety to add those steps, because the slope from the foreshore walkway next to the sea wall was that severe down to here, inviting youngsters to go down, inviting them. And I had to almost threaten them with health and safety, and they very miserably and reluctantly put these top steps in, so it wasn't so severe. But if you look, it's still a slope from the foreshore walkway to the first step. Now they've got handrails each side. There's no 1 metre high curved barrier in the middle with bars. Still have access both sides for prams and people, but it's just a warning not to cycle down, not to run down, because these steps which you can see how steep they are, you can see a child easily being seriously injured or even killed, or even the elderly. If they have mobility problems back on the slope, these handrails should go right to the foreshore walkway, not that 15 foot from the edge here to the walkway without a handrail, without something to hold on to. And why there's a gap here each side in the handrail, one one beggars to believe. The only reason there is a gap, because originally the stairs started here. And you can imagine that slope, how steep it was from the walkway to here. I do have photographs which I will add to this to show you how severe it was. And the only reason, if you look at the gap here, is that when they put the new staircase in, they've not amended the bars to make it continuous from the top down. They've just shunted a couple in, which are even the wrong slope design to these existing ones. Cheapskates. They've actually done something to save them money, where they should, those top ones should have been welded so it was one continuous handrail from the top down here. Having a gap here is no good for the mobility problem people. There's nothing to hold on to. Not even for the small children holding onto the handrail. There's a gap here. Doesn't make sense. It's just sloppy design and all done to save them money, because they were so miffed that I dared to have a temerity to say that what they'd done was dangerous. So that's about this. This is a pure health and safety matter. And even now, seeing today, which I hadn't thought about before, not doing the handrails at the top part, the extended steps, they haven't even matched these up, so it's not continuous. Another sign that this contractor was totally the wrong one to be allowed to do public works on Canvey Island. And we hope they and Avery, who built the cafe at Thorny Bay, which we covered earlier, with a stupid staircase that two people with mobility problems or two groups of parents with children can't pass each other on the staircase because it's only just over 3 feet wide. Ridiculous. Not going to last long anyway, because it's timber, and built the stairs themselves, the stairs itself, the top, is just like the car park, made of the same material with little stones which you slip on, and now it's sinking the clay a bit, so you've now got a trip hazard on each wooden support, you know, on the steps. And I've seen several accidents. Sorry, I've seen one accident, but I've heard of several more. And at the moment, it's about 7 accidents that have happened since it opened a few weeks ago, when the builders, Avery, the builders of the cafe and extended car park, left the site without finishing it properly, without having it swept properly. The new extended car park take the surface granules of clay away. So even up to now, when you're in the car park and it's a bit wet from a few drops of rain we've had, you get in the car and the floor by the driver plus the passengers is covered with this clay mush. And you can just imagine then your feet are quite wet and slippery. You can imagine them slipping on the various levers of brakes and gears and everything else. Here again, nothing thought about. I'm just going to read a short statement at the end of these videos. These short videos are highlighting serious failings by the powers that be, and will someone at higher authority or the national press please support our campaign to rectify matters. Emails, telephone calls, etc. have been made to all the relevant parties, and they've all stonewalled, assuming they have the powers to do what they like on Canvey Island without involving the local population, which is clearly wrong. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.